I was 18 when I first saw those misty hills, eternally shrouded in a thick, grey haze. I had come there in search of work, escaping the crushing poverty of the big city where I had no one left. My 19th birthday arrived the morning after I reached the village. That was the day I officially took my position, never suspecting that I was signing a death warrant for my own soul. The contract seemed like a true salvation. In the paperwork, it was stated as the provision of domestic support and psychological comfort for workers in a closed, autonomous settlement. My main task, as it was explained to me then, was the preparation of food for hundreds of men and the washing of their heavy clothes, which were always saturated with metallic dust. In the beginning, everything was surprisingly quiet. The men seemed somber and endlessly tired, but polite. They would pass me on their way to the dining hall, keeping their eyes on the floor as if afraid to profane my youth with their heavy gaze. But this silence was merely a deceptive mask, a calm before the storm that was meant to break as soon as the formalities were over. A week later, a high commission arrived at the village. Important people in strict black suits and polished shoes inspected the barracks, looked into the mines, and checked the kitchen. They approached me while I was hanging heavy work robes out to dry. "How do you like it here, dear?" one of them asked, adjusting his golden spectacles. "Do these rugged men treat you well?" I gave him the most sincere smile I was capable of. I was young, foolish, and far too naive. I told him that everything was fine, that the air here was clean, and that the work gave me a sense of purpose. The commission left an hour later, completely satisfied with the results of their inspection. If only I had known then that their black car, disappearing into the road dust, would be the last reminder of the civilized world. Their departure was the unspoken signal for the beginning of my personal hell. That same evening, the door to my cabin opened without a knock. On the threshold stood the shift supervisor, a man with a face etched by deep wrinkles. His eyes shone with a strange, feverish light in the glow of the kerosene lamp. "Now that the extra eyes have gone back to the city," he whispered in his hoarse voice, "it is time to begin your true duties. In this valley, lost among the crags, there existed its own unwritten law, the law of full compensation. From that very evening, my home ceased to be my sanctuary. Evening after evening, as long shadows stretched across the earth, an invisible but endless line began to form at my door. I quickly and painfully understood the true meaning of those words in the contract, which had been written in tiny, almost illegible print. It was my duty to provide that very comfort to the weary workers of the valley. They came one after another, an unending stream, hundreds of calloused hands, hundreds of faces that over time merged into a single faceless gray mass for me. They attended to their natural requirements silently and methodically, as if I were not a living human being with feelings, but a necessary technical resource, the same as water from a tap or coal in a furnace. In their actions, there was not a grain of passion or warmth, only a primal, heavy necessity to satisfy their eternal hunger in the face of an inevitable end. I became the involuntary center of their closed rituals, the only living reminder of the life they had once left behind forever. But even among this oppressive gray mass, there were other people. There was a young man named Mark. He always brought me a little extra bread from the bakery or a handful of fresh berries that he managed to find on the slopes of the canyon. Mark never crossed the threshold of my room after sunset. He simply sat on the wooden porch, leaned his back against the wall, and spent hours telling me about the vast blue sea, which I might never see again in my life. There were other men as well, elderly and silent. They helped me carry the heavy containers of ice-cold water from the well, taking care not to touch my hands even by accident. These people were like ghosts of an old life in a place where humanity was considered an unnecessary weakness. They all knew perfectly well that this was their final limit. They knew that their bodies were slowly and irreversibly breaking down from the work in the deep mines where they extracted something forbidden. Their illness was incurable, hiding in their lungs and blood, and they had resigned themselves to the fact that they would never return to the normal world. They were prisoners deprived of hope, and I was their last anchor in this reality. I tried to escape 3 times, and each attempt was an act of pure despair. Mark and I didn't build complex plans. We had no maps or compass, only an endless faith that if we walked long enough along the forest path, we would reach civilization. We fled in the dead of night, pushing through thorny bushes and freezing at every rustle. But the old supervisor, who had long suspected something was wrong, tracked us down. He did not sleep that night. He gathered 2 other sturdy workers, and they overtook us a few miles from the village, just as our strength had completely failed us. They seized us without a sound. The old man looked at me with that same eerie, knowing smirk. The punishment followed immediately, right there in the cold shadows of the forest. While 2 workers held Mark, forcing him to watch, the old man and the others decided to remind me of my true purpose in this village. It was a brutal act, devoid of any intimacy, merely a way to finally break my will and show me that I am not a human being here, but only a thing for the satisfaction of needs. I lay in the damp leaves, staring into the indifferent gray sky, listening to Mark's screams until they turned into a rasp. Mark was punished differently. They did not inflict mortal wounds, but they warned him in such a way that fear became his shadow. He was forbidden from even looking in my direction, with the promise that next time his body would be found in a ravine. From that day on, an invisible but insurmountable wall grew between us. Later, wandering in the rare hours of freedom behind the old warehouses, I stumbled upon something that finally robbed me of sleep. In the shade of stunted trees, I discovered abandoned mounds of earth. There were no names on the rotting plaques, only dates, and all these records belonged to women. I realized that I was just another link in this chain, and not one before me had lasted here longer than a year. Mark told me the final truth. All these men were afflicted by a sickness, not only a physical one from hard labor, but a spiritual one born of years of isolation. They were the living dead, forgotten by the world, and I was their only bitter consolation before the inevitable end. Their cruelty was merely a reflection of their own despair. We were all locked in this trap where humanity was considered an unnecessary weakness. Now I look into a cracked mirror and do not recognize myself. My eyes have dried up and my fate is broken beyond repair. The shame and pain of that night in the forest have become my new skin. Even if they tell me tomorrow that I am free, I know that I cannot return to the world of ordinary people. They would see my secret in my eyes. I have stayed here forever. I simply sit on the threshold and wait for my date to appear on one of those small plaques behind the old warehouse. It is the only finale left for me in this village of silent men.